Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our February autonomy educational webinar on navigating relationships. Today, we have two panelists, Kim Dolmanet from Spectrum Services and Joe Carr, who's on our Autistic Adult Advisory Panel at the Autism Society of Texas. I don't know if either of you just want to go ahead and introduce yourselves briefly.
Sure. I'm Kim Dolmanet. I'm a speech language pathologist. I have been working at Spectrum Services for about 17 years and then in the schools in Texas for about 25. I'm currently in Milwaukee where it's super cold and
wow.
snowy. So, yeah, Zoom. But yeah, I work with a lot of kind of tweens through adults, and a lot of their concerns and a lot of their personal goals are around relationships and friendships and dating and the things that we all kind of think about and want and worry about. So, and I should also say I'm neurotypical mostly. I have some like visual spatial disorder stuff, but I'm not autistic. So I'm kind of representing the neurotypical perspective here.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. I'm Joe Carr. I am autistic. I was not diagnosed as a child. So I was misdiagnosed ADHD, but that wasn't really right. So I think my official diagnosis was obnoxious. I was just obnoxious kid. So a lot of relationship challenges, no friends, in trouble all the time. So really bad relationships with both kids and adults, and really had to figure that out on my own, and figured out how to do relationships over many years. Now am happily married, have an amazing daughter, have lots of great friends. My wife and I run a baby food company with 40 employees who all seem to like and respect me. So, definitely figured it out. In my process, I worked with a dating and relationship coach and then became a dating and relationship coach. So in addition to my own life, I've also worked with a lot of people on, especially men, and including a variety of autistic men, on how to do relationships and dating and connection, and develop autism as a connection superpower.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, we're glad you're here. Yeah, so I guess just to start us off, and you touched on it a little bit already, Joe, but what are some of the unique strengths and challenges that can happen when autistic people are trying to build relationships?
Yeah, there's this myth that autistic people are loners or don't like connection or are afraid of people. And it's just, in my experience, not true. At least it's not true across the board. I mean, there's a mix of introverted and extroverted in all the population, and I find that true in autistic people. There's introverted autistic people and extroverted. But as a general rule, like all humans, we're social animals. We like people, we like connection, we want relationships, we want to be loved, we want to be around people. We have a kind of certain way we do it that's a little different than the general population, and then I think there's two major. I think the strengths and challenges are the same. Ultimately, they're two sides of the coin. So one of the big aspects of autism is we're sensitive. We're very sensitive to stimulation, to light, sound, noise. I find we're also sensitive to energies, emotions, intentions. And so in a way, this is great for relationships because we can intuit what a person is feeling, or sense if they're off, or experience their joy or pleasure in a more extreme way. So that can be really useful in relating if we if we develop that ourselves and are honest with ourselves about that. And if we have a partner that wants us to feel them and is willing to be felt and experienced in that way. Can be a huge challenge. Number one, if our partner is feeling one thing but says another, which a lot of people do. The incongruency of that is very challenging for us, and it feels like we're crazy, or we're, something a lot of us think we're bad at relationships because we sense the truth underneath their words that aren't fully true, and then we think something's wrong with us, and actually it's like they're just not being fully honest, which, either because they don't know, like they just don't know what they're feeling, they think they're fine when they're not, or they're, genuinely, uncomfortable trying expressing it and are some version of lying. And this is basically what people are taught to do. They're taught not to be honest about their feelings or even feel them at all. And so the challenge there is finding people who are willing to be more congruous with their words and their feelings, or at least be open to trying that, and genuinely want us to be felt. The other superpower we have is that we can't really lie. It's like one of the strengths of autistic people is that we don't lie. And we're very honest. We're very blunt, sometimes too honest, right? We're very clear about what we're thinking, what's going on in our minds. We don't misrepresent ourselves. And again, relationship superpower. Who wants a partner that tells the truth all the time, right? That's what people say they want. They want somebody who's honest and tells them the real truth, right? Or at least they say that's what they want. But then sometimes it can come out a little too harsh, or they didn't really want the truth, or like it's they're not really ready to face that. They're not prepared to be fully honest themselves, and so they feel uncomfortable. So it's again one of those superpowers but we have to find people that are ready to hear the truth and understand that sometimes our truth doesn't come out as filtered as maybe they would have liked it, but that they respect the fact that, well, at least they know where we stand.
Yeah, for sure. Kim, do you have anything you want to add based on your experience?
I think just on a more kind of pragmatic level, just like day-to-day level, I see a lot of my clients and friends just kind of struggling with like mismatches, right? Mismatches in like sensory needs, or mismatches in like energy level, or how much capacity they have to spend time together, or not understanding when the other person needs to be alone. And sometimes that's a function of like my autistic clients kind of looking for neurotypical partners. And sometimes that's just kind of personality, right? Or capacity, because we're all individuals. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. We all have different needs. And those can fluctuate across the course of a relationship and across the course of a day. So navigating like different expectations, different capacity, that I think is the biggest, different styles, different communication styles. Kind of figuring out how to bridge that, whether it's between a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person, or two neurodivergent people. That's the struggle. I think that's the struggle really in any relationship. But I think it's kind of amplified when you throw neurodivergence in the mix, So just kind of figuring out like, what are your needs and what are your expectations, and how do you match that to another person, and how do you kind of mesh those together and make it work together?
Yeah, for sure. Which kind of goes, into the next question. What are some of the skills, that could help anyone, autistic or not? I think, something we talked about is just relationship skills are relationship skills. So what could help people kind of navigate their relationships more authentically, or maybe work through, some of those challenges when they are mismatched? And either of you can feel free to chime in.
I can jump in. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about and reading about and just grappling with a lot lately is kind of like masking and unmasking, and how you do that in a society that's still super ableist. How you do that in a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a dating relationship, a romantic relationship. To me, like for me personally, one of my favorite things, we've been together almost 11 years, almost 12 years. And one of my favorite things about my husband is that I can be like 100% myself. I can be goofy and dumb and like lazy, like whatever. Every side of me, I can kind of let it loose with my husband. And so I coming from a kind of a speech therapy background and like coming from the old sort of Michelle Garcia Winner social thinking background, there's a real conflict between teaching my clients to be better maskers and teaching them to unmask and like let's not worry about that stuff. Let's talk about how we can be more authentic and like how is masking going to serve you in a relationship down the road? Like it might help initially, it might help you attract a person or get a second date, but then you're kind of stuck in this relationship where you're not showing up as who you really are, and that to me is that's not okay. Like that's to me that just sounds awful. So I think there are skills. I think thinking about masking and thinking about how you show up as your authentic self is one really important thing that is kind of new in the sort of therapy biz for a lot of people. But I think it's really, really important as opposed to kind of teaching neurotypical social skills. So yeah. Joe,
Yeah.
what do you think?
I had to turn relationships and relating into a special interest. Like in the same way that I would dive in on the Marvel universe canon. Could dove in on like how to hack relating, right? And so we have this ability to like hyper focus and like get really learn about something and become better at it. So relating is one of those things that like it implies that it's like it's supposed to be natural, just something that we do, and we don't have to try or stuff. It's supposed to be easy. We're supposed to fall in love, right? And it's not true. It's not true for neurotypical people, given the 50% divorce rate. I think that's pretty clear. And it's not true for us. So, we have to work at it. We have to learn the skills, both relating in and of itself, but also our specific friend or romantic partner, learning them. One of the things that we have to learn is their subtleties. We're not naturally good at subtleties. It's one of our challenges is we'd rather people just say exactly what they want all the time. And this is common in man-woman relating in general, but even more dramatic with autistic people and autistic people around subtleties. And so the cool thing with subtleties with a friend, with a close friend or a romantic partner, is we can start to memorize their specific subtleties. Like they tend to say the same thing when they mean the other thing pretty consistently. And my wife is open to trying to be more clear about that. And actually, when I pointed out that, like, when she asks me if I would like to take the trash out, she's actually means I would like you to take the trash out, right? Like that's like one of those things that she's working on, but it's an old pattern that she's not going to fix overnight to just switch that. But I can switch it. Like I can start to remember when she says that she's making a request, she's not actually asking me what I want. And then I can respond to that way. And so that takes a lot of dialogue. I have to ask her, hey, when you say, would you like this, are you actually meaning? And again, my ability to feel her, intuit her, or like I say, no, I'd rather not take the trash out. And then I see that she has like an emotional response. That's like education. I'm like, oh, that maybe she actually wanted me to. And, she, now she's disappointed, and so like, this is kind of that using the intuitive or the feeling superpower, but then also I got to bring it up. I have to talk about it and ask her. And then, but that's that constant negotiations, there's constant discussion about, and it's a lot of debriefing, debriefing. We like to say never waste a good fight, right? Like if you have a fight, like in the moment is not the time to figure it out, but later is like, hey, well, how did this happen? Where, what triggered what? How could we possibly work on that in the future? And being willing to revisit and not just kind of like let the dust settle and then go back to business as usual, which is it's just a compelling thing to do because it's hard to, you don't want to dig up the wound again. But if you don't, you're just gonna have the same fight over and over, and that can go out of control. When possible, help is great. My wife and I have a relationship coach that we've worked with for all 9 years of our relationship. Wouldn't still be together without that guy. Really great coach. There's really great. There's also obviously a huge therapy, couples therapist industry. I think the strength of a coach is that they're independent and that they can help you both feel like they're on your side. That's how you know if they're a good coach or therapist. If you both feel like they're on your side. If they seem to take sides ever, they're probably not the right fit. So they need to feel that way. But it doesn't have to be paid. It could be a friend. It could be a mutual friend. In this, just in friends relationships, is like we keep having the same argument, the same disagreement, the same fights come up. Let's just bring in a third party. This is another person. What do you think about this? You know us well. What do you think is the root of this? And they'd be surprised at how impactful that can be, just to hear another person even if they appear to be taking a side, like, well, they sort of agree. It's just useful information to be like, okay, maybe I need to look at that.
And Joe, I want to jump back and say, like, I don't mean that there are no skills to learn or be taught. Like, any relationship takes
Yeah.
effort and time, and you know, getting a date is a skill. Getting a second date is a skill. Like, all of those things are things that like working with somebody, working with a coach, working with a therapist, like addressing anxiety. There's so much anxiety around like putting yourself out there and like potentially being rejected. Like, it can be soul crushing after a while. So kind of finding ways to deal with anxiety, and then just learning skills about, how do you reach out to someone? How do you set up a time to hang out? How do you make a connection if you don't have the capacity to like meet in person? Um, you know, Maybe just even like working with someone to figure out some options. Like, if I'm kind of starting from ground zero, how do I make that first connection? Whether it's like online, maybe it's a support group, maybe it's a special interest group. But just, so there are definitely skills to be taught. I think where I'm coming from is that I no longer want to teach those as like, you have to do it like a neurotypical person does. So figuring out like what works for you, and then let's like take the next step. And what's the next step after that? And okay, you have a second date with this person. What does that look like? And kind of troubleshooting along the way, just like you're talking about with your wife. Like, relationships of any kind are require effort. They have a great payoff, but it's not just like, oh, this just happens. Like, I suddenly have this best friend and we spend so much time together. That takes time and effort and investment in that other person, and their time and effort and investment in you as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
relationships, they're meant to be fulfilling and grounding and safe. They were not meant to be easy. They're not, or they're not even meant to be comfortable a lot of the time. There are moments of great comfort and there's moments of great ease, right? You don't want to be struggling all the time. But there are definitely moments of discord. You let them in to this deep part of you, which is the only way you can be loved, is to open yourself up and let them in. But then they're going to step on wounds you have in there, and it's just enough, and you're going to step on theirs, and it's just how it works. And so, the cool thing is, autistic people, we're used to being uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable most of the time. So, like, facing discomfort is one of those things that we know how to do. Of course, because of that, we often avoid discomfort because we're always uncomfortable. So that's like recognizing like it's okay to be uncomfortable in the relationship. It's okay to be, everybody's uncomfortable asking for a date. Everybody's uncomfortable expressing something vulnerable. If we've been trampled on, if we've been rejected a lot, it's harder for us, So that's where the therapy and the tools, like you said, around learning how to be brave enough to be vulnerable and be rejected more again and again, because that is relationship, is they may not always want what I'm offering. And I, they may trigger old wounds in me that aren't even about them, that are about something in the past, but that's mine. I got to be prepared to do that. Of course, the only alternative is to be closed forever and be alone, which is also very uncomfortable in a very long run kind of way. So, but unfortunately there's no comfortable way, but there is a path to fulfillment and safety.
Yeah, and then we touched on it a little bit, relationships take two people to work. So, maybe could both touch on a little bit more how to navigate relationships when there isn't reciprocity, or how to notice, when you're doing all of the work in the relationship or things like that.
Yeah, I wrote an article about this where I call it the ospecker. The ospecker is the bird that lives on the rhinoceros. Very different creatures, very different needs, but they live in harmony. They mate for a very long time. I don't think it's life, but they pick. The ospecker and the rhinoceros have this symbiotic relationship, and they eat the bugs off the rhinoceros, and it provides it some protection, and it keeps the rhinoceros from getting bugs eaten on it. And so there's this like very different but symbiotic thing. And so with my wife, she she identifies as an HSP, a highly sensitive person, which I don't know if I don't think that's in the DSM, but it's a thing. Like people who they're not autistic. She doesn't have issues with social skills. She doesn't hyper focus. She understands subtleties, that kind of thing. But she does specifically have this like sensitivity to her, and so that's a place where we can relate. Like she can understand how sensitive I am. I can understand how sensitive she is. We can feel each other very deeply. We can get into very deep synergies because we're both aware of that and approval of that. So some kind of acceptance of neurodivergence helps in a partner. I don't really believe in neurotypical. I call it neuroconformist, which is like if you just are trying to be normal or are you embracing the way that you're weird. Everybody's got a little bit of that. So I think someone who's like okay with different, okay with outside the box in themselves and in their life and in their partner is going to be useful for us because we're never going to fit a mold. And so if they want the cookie cutter life, which I'm not sure really exists, but if they want that, they're not going to get that with us. So, but fortunately, there's lots of people who don't want that. There's lots of people who are looking for something unique, looking for something different, looking for something outside the box. So they need to be open to that. They need to have some level of self-awareness. We obviously have to have self-awareness also. And so that's one of those things that if one person's self-aware and the other isn't, it's just not going to work. Even in neurotypical couples, that's not going to work. Like you both have to be willing to like look at the relationship, talk about the relationship, take ownership of mistakes, admit to things, grow. Some value honesty. You don't have to like be as honest as us all the time, but they need to at least try. Value it, and just that willingness to stay with something to get the reward, right? They need to like our intensity, our feelings, our honesty. They need to enjoy that in us, even if sometimes it's a little much and they'd rather be toned down a little, they at least like value it.
And I think it goes both ways, right? Like we tend to, the people I work with and some friends of mine, like they get so focused on, I need to attract this person. I need to make myself attractive to this person. I need to like get this person to like me, that they kind of forget to stop and think, do I actually like them? Am I attracted to them? So the same has to go, it has to be a two-way street. And that's kind of like where that reciprocity comes in, right? So I think that when you have gotten the message that socially you're not kind of living up to the standard and you're not meeting expectations, it seems like the burden can feel like it's all on you to make the effort. But every person deserves to be in relationships that are reciprocal. They're not 100% reciprocal all the time. And there are times when one person does more of the heavy lifting, but there has to be like a co-creation of a relationship, right? Like you have to make a little bit of effort and take a little bit of risk, and then they have to respond and make the effort and take a little risk. Otherwise, you're just kind of like doing all the work, putting in all the effort, getting very little of the reward. And it can be really exhausting over time. So kind of paying attention to when you put a little effort into it, when you make an overture, when you like put yourself out there, what's coming back? Like, what are you getting in return? Are they meeting that? Maybe not at the same pace all at the same time, but are you getting something in return? So, I think that like in some ways, a lot of my younger kids, when I work with kind of like middle school, early teenage kids, they kind of mistake friendliness for friendship. And so kind of talking about like, what actually is friendship? What does that look like? What does that mean to you? What do you need from a friend? What are you hoping to get out of a friendship? What are your boundaries? Like being able to set boundaries is a huge one. When over time, like you've had to kind of, or you've been taught, or it's been reinforced in you to ignore those. So whether it's sensory or whether it's physical or whether it's, emotional, um, kind of helping kids and adults understand like this is what's important to me. This is where my boundaries are. Here's where I'm going to put a little effort in, and then are you getting effort back? Um, so yeah, so again, I think, like I hate to bring up Michelle Garcia Winner again, but one thing she's great at is kind of codifying neurotypical culture, right? So it's in that sense, like I think she's very helpful to get a sense of like, okay, here's how the neurotypical social world works. Doesn't mean you have to do that, but it can be helpful to understand. And so stuff like the friendship pyramid can still be really helpful to kind of give you a sort of a basic paradigm in your head for like, okay, this person is an acquaintance, they're being friendly to me, but we are not friends yet. I might be attracted to them, there might be something about them that I like, but to get to that next level, it takes a little bit of time and effort. So in that sense, I think that really explicitly teaching like friendship, really like how you connect, how you move it to the next level, that's really helpful, especially for some of my younger clients and students.
I
Yeah.
think you have to decide, are you based off your history or your proclivities, is the next step to try to weed out or weed in?
Mm.
Uh, for me, I, was desperate for connection and friendship. So I tried to be friends with everybody who talked to me. I would try to date every girl that would smile at me. Like I had to learn to weed out. I had to learn to be like, okay, look for the ones that you really feel drawn to, that you really like, and then make sure they're on the same page, and like I had to sort of weed out in that way. But there's a lot of people I've met that are loners. They don't want to talk to anybody. They're very, very isolated, and so giving them that feedback, wait for someone who's exactly right for you, like that's just an excuse to like not talk to anybody, right? So those people need to do the opposite thing. You need to put yourself out there. You need to like, just a similar process of like trying to identify who, might be a good fit, but then they have to actually weed in. They have to like make effort and, like you said, use some of those tools. And so figuring out which way to go can be helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a balance. Like we don't want to turn relationships into like a checklist, like
Right.
just people like marking off the boxes because like everyone's kind of bringing their complexity, but I think it is important to think about like what you want and kind of what you're getting out of a relationship and like what your needs are too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with checklists on some level because, like I said, I turned this into like a special interest and like, do they meet it or not? It's more than most people do, so like, I'd rather be over checklists than like just like going with whoever comes along. On the checklist should be, how do I feel? There should be some
Yeah.
some non quantifiable things like, how do I feel around them? Do I feel attracted to them? I feel safe around them? Do they seem interested in me? Right? Like it shouldn't just be like, do they like, are they Star Wars or Star Trek?
Yeah.
Like that, like
Sure.
which can be
Yeah.
on there, but it's like the feeling stuff should take precedence. But it is a list. It is like, if you have to get to that granular level, better than being alone.
For sure.
Well, and I also feel like as someone who did online dating for 7 years, like you have to have a certain set of,
Yeah.
I don't think it's wrong to have a certain set of like, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want in a person. Um, I always felt like I had a type, and then every significant relationship in my life was the exact opposite of that type. So it's funny when you talk about weeding in, Joe, because I worked with a guy who was awesome. He was like an amazing guy, but he had this very specific criteria for the women that he would date, they had to be 5'6", they had to be brunette, they had to be a C cup or larger, like they had to be, you know, under a certain weight. And he couldn't understand why he was single and couldn't, you know, and like, it's like, dude, could we consider loosening some of those restrictions? No. So, okay. I don't know if he's still looking. It's been a while, but hopefully he found his brunette queen.
At some point, you have to accept that that's a trick to remain alone. You know, that like you're just sabotaging yourself at that point.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's what I'd have to work with. And you have to come to that realization on your own that the checklist is useful to a certain degree, but when it starts to weed people out so much that you're isolated, like it's not them that's the problem.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I think that, brings us to another question. So, you're trying to figure out, what your needs are, what do you want out of a relationship? So, if you feel like you aren't getting those things, if, things maybe aren't kind of feeling reciprocal, what are some strategies that you found effective to communicate those needs? Like, what do you say? When do you say it? How do you phrase things so that they can be heard? Things like that.
Mhm. I mean, I talk about autism really early. It doesn't have to be the first date, but like before you go to any significant next steps, like second or third date, or this is going in the direction of like we're gonna be even a short relationship. I would tell them, and so that helps to like just start the conversation of what does that mean, and you can't just tell them the label and like leave it there because a lot of people don't know what it means. So you have to like tell them this is what it means. This is what I identify it as. This is what that means for me. Like this is the specific ways that manifests, whether it's the sensitivity or the bluntness, or those are two obvious ones, but there could be all kinds of different things. So kind of having that like self-disclosure, and then asking them how it's this is a lot of thing a lot of people just don't do is like what do I want from a relationship? How do I express boundaries? What are my values? Like even talking about it's amazing how many people don't ever actually talk about sex and like do they actually want it or not, or when do they want it, or what kinds of things do they want, and like and of course that stuff just has to be talked about, but it's like the movies, they never talk about it, they just like start kissing or tearing each other's clothes off, and it's like what, like you guys met like an hour ago. So like it's just it's just not how it is. You've got to be able to talk, and so the setting that from the beginning really will also help. I set the stage for that to be the relationship. So if somebody really doesn't want that, early, and but communicating it constantly, and then with any disagreements or fights or when emotions are high is the time not to try to talk about it. So it's best, I think, to take as much space as possible when triggered, not stay in a yelling match or try to immediately reconnect while you're still angry. Like allow there to be some uncomfortable space. Not so much that you're avoiding it, or not so little that you're like needing to get back in reconnection, but untriggered and then revisit. So being able to debrief, to talk about it later, outside of the moment, and then try to apply lessons from that going forward.
Yeah, I think also dating, we're kind of specifically talking about dating, it seems like, but dating is really kind of like a job interview, right? Like you are interviewing each other to see if you qualify for that position. And so, when I was like online dating for years and years and years, I really kind of came to the realization that it's almost not personal. Like it's you're either the right person for that person or you're not. And it's either the right time for that person or it's not. And the same goes for you. And so I try to look at it as not every rejection is about me. It's either that we don't fit together or I don't work for that person, but maybe they don't work for me either. So being willing, and I know this is hard when you feel like it's, every connection is so hard won, but being willing to walk away from the not right person because, it, I truly think that there is a right person out there. you know, my mom used to tell me that like there's a lid for every pot. So you just have to keep working on finding your lid. And sometimes you put the wrong lid on for a while. You meet the wrong person and you something about them appeals to you and you try to make it work. But at some point you have to be able to say like, this is not working. We need to kind of move on. That, you know, whether that's this first date or 3 months into it or, you know, 14 years into it, speaking from personal experience. So, but I think being transparent, like, again, you don't have to kind of like splash across your dating profile, I am autistic or whatever. But Joe, you mentioned that like, you don't necessarily label it, but you talk about the characteristics, right? So you kind of like let people know without necessarily having to come out and say it, but like, this is, you know, what I'm interested in. This is, these are the what I need. This is what my challenges are. So being transparent, of course you want to put your best, you want to make the best impression you can, but if you're making that impression as like a different person with different interests or different needs, I just feel like that is destined for failure because you either won't be able to sustain that or you'll sustain it it takes so much effort and so much energy that it becomes you know, it's not rewarding, it's not positive, it's just another, you know, it's just another struggle, just another challenge. So kind of being like, I think one of the best ways to really find your people and find your tribe and find, you know, someone that you can connect with is to be super honest about like, what are all your nerdy passions? Like, what do you love? Even if like 95% of the people in the world are going to think it's ridiculous, you know, like, what are you super into? What makes your heart happy? Connect through that stuff. Be honest about that stuff because that's a beautiful kind of sorting mechanism, right? If you're honest about what you love and what you enjoy, and what, you know, I feel like that's kind of a sorting mechanism in itself, where that weeds out people who are going to be like judgmental or find it too childish or find it silly. So
These are all 100% true for friendships. There's nothing that we say.
absolutely.
You can fire a friend, right? You can break up with a friend. You can interview people to be friends. You know, you can
Yeah.
be honest. You can debrief their fights. Like everything we said applies to friendships. And you know, again, I think this you need to be able to leave. Also comes down to like where do you flex? Like, do you leave too soon and you need to like learn to like ask for what you want a little more and be more clear and honest before you leave? Give them a chance. Or like, you know, I was the opposite. I would stay too long. I would like, you know, beat a dead horse and like not get my needs met again and again and again and again and hope they would change until I had to like, you know, until they would leave me, basically. That was my pattern. So it's like, you know, just a matter of which way do you lean towards. There's a great book on attachment styles that I think was really useful for that called Attached. And are you, you know, too much intimacy, what they call anxious attached, or are you like too afraid of intimacy, they call avoidant? Everybody sort of falls somewhere on the scale and, you know, learn how to flex your style.
And I think just, you know, relationships can change over time, right? I mean, I think also, you know, maybe especially with romantic relationships, but I think kind of any relationship, there can be this narrative that like, if this doesn't last forever, you know, if this relationship, you know, isn't, you know, until you die, then it was a failure or it wasn't worth doing or you did something wrong. But I mean, the reality is, I think, you know, we're all hopefully growing and changing over time. And so sometimes that means we like grow apart and that can be really painful, but it's not like if you find, you know, the right person, they could be right now, but you know, I mean, like you were saying, Kim, they may not be right in 10 or 15 years. And so I think we have to like be okay with that too, that like all of this is like dynamic on some level. And I know we touched on, you know, rejection a little bit, you know, but maybe we could kind of dive deeper into that because I know that, you know, can be something that's like really common, for autistic people to have challenges with rejection. So what advice would you give someone who's maybe experienced trauma around that in the past, and that's affecting their relationships, or that courage to kind of be willing to try again, or to continue, seeking out new relationships?
Yeah, there's no relating without it. And I had a lot of trauma from it, right? So this is like it's a really big barrier. We have to do work to heal the trauma. We never heal it all the way. No person ever enjoys it, no matter how healed they are. So it's never fun. It's never easy. You have to be cold hearted to be like, well, fuck you then. You can't be that way. It's gonna always feel bad. So like there's there's a degree of stability that we can get to where it doesn't like destroy us, doesn't ruin our week, but it always sucks a little bit. The way, what I would teach people, the way I approached it was, you're making an offer, would you like some tea? Oh, no, thanks. I don't want any tea. Okay. I'm not like rejected that you didn't want tea. You don't want tea. I'm gonna give you tea. And so that's sort of like, would you like to go on a date with me? Would you like to be friends? Would you like to go on a thing? It's like an offer. I'm making an offer. And if they say no, I have to reframe from they're not rejecting me, they're rejecting the offer. And ultimately it's good. I don't want to make them tea if they don't want tea. Like, why bother making them tea, right? If they didn't want, wouldn't want them to say yes if they're not a yes. So it's a gift if they tell me no. Okay, I'm glad to know that you don't want that, because I don't want to, if you don't want to go on a date with me, I wouldn't want to go on a date with you anyway, right? Like that's not what I want. So it's a blessing for them to say no. Of course, like I said, all we want is honesty. All we want is that congruency. So like ultimately, it even though it's it's disappointing. Oh, I really wanted that. It's too bad. I was really hoping to make you some tea, but like, and maybe there's another offer, like they want coffee instead, but maybe they don't want anything, right? They're not thirsty. They don't want to date you or anybody, who knows what it is. And so it's a gift, but it's a numbers game. The more you ask, the more you hear no, the more easier it gets. There is a fairly small percentage of people that we're going to be close friends with, an even smaller percentage that we're going to date. So in the scheme of things, we're going to get rejected a lot more than we're going to get accepted, like that's just kind of the nature of it. And again, we have to just reframe it and, get back on the horse constantly, like, oh, okay, if not you, there's someone else, and just trust that there will be somebody who wants it also, and keep asking.
And I know that it's invalidating to say that that is hard for everybody, but it truly is hard for everybody. It's harder when you have a history of like feeling rejected in like all kinds of social situations. I've been thinking a lot about, I read just a quote from somewhere, and I don't even know who to attribute it to, but basically it was a neuroscientist saying like, there are very few situations that you can improve 100%, but there's very few situations that you can't improve at least 1%. So, working with that concept, like, can you reach out in a lower stakes way? If you're feeling really isolated and really lonely and like really just kind of defeated by this whole relationship thing, whether it's friendships or whether it's, romantic relationships, like what can you do to make yourself feel 1% better? Can you join can you get on an autism subreddit? Like, can you make a comment? Can you get on Discord? Can you join an autism advocacy group, even if it's just online? What can you do to kind of like improve, make a connection that makes you feel 1% better? And then take that and translate it into the next 1% and the next 1%. So sometimes it takes baby steps, right? Like it takes small steps that where you can find connection, where you can find, and a lot of times I feel like for a lot of the people that I've worked with and friends, if they're finding kind of like a positive autistic identity, like connecting with other autistic people in a place where they're accepted, in a place that feels safe, where people get them, like that can help you kind of build back up your tolerance and your ability to kind of accept, rejection. If you feel like you have nobody and you have no connections, it's really hard to handle that. So finding ways to like build tiny little connections, even if it's just a little bit at a time, can, I think, be kind of a protective kind of approach. Oh, and I was going to say something else and it's totally gone out of my head. So yeah.
No worries. Maybe it'll come back. I think one thing that also helped me was really learning to enjoy my own company in like an authentic way, which like doesn't mean you never feel lonely, which doesn't mean that we don't still need relationships and connection, but like the more like also I guess thinking about like being in a relationship with myself. So like, can I take myself on a date to like that restaurant that I want to go to, or like a bookstore, or what are my hobbies and interests, and can I spend time doing with that? And then I think the more that I like myself and the more that I can just kind of enjoy my own company, then it's like somebody else has to be better than that, right? If they're not better than that, then it's not worth my time. So that could be like another strategy too. But I know that y'all also like this is so complex, and we've kind of maybe thrown so much at folks that I know y'all kind of had just some takeaways that were maybe a little more concrete that we wanted to leave folks with. So I'll just paste those into the chat, and then maybe you can just kind of refresh your memory for which ones you wanted to share with folks, just so they can feel like, okay, but like what am I taking away from this? Kind of, what's my next step?
It's a tough one, Dana. I think that it is complex. I think it's so individualized. I think, if you have the ability to kind of find someone to help you navigate it, whether that's a therapist or a friend or, whoever that is for you, that can be really helpful. I think if you are working with a therapist, there's some really good neurotypical, but like neurodivergent understanding therapists out there. So just kind of make sure you're vetting who you're working with. Yeah, takeaways. Boy, it's really hard to kind of like boil it down to like do this, but not this. I think give yourself grace. This is hard work and complicated. And your relationships may never look like, what they look like in the movies. Your relationships may never look like what neurotypical relationships look like, and that's okay. And they probably shouldn't. And I think the thing that I've really been kind of thinking about and talking about with my clients and my friends the most is, how do you connect to an autistic community? Like, how do you find an autistic identity that supports you, that's positive, that is kind of insulating from, the stress of masking? I think that a lot of times people I'm working with are really, really trying to figure out neurotypical culture, which I understand, and I think that's not a bad, goal to have. But at the same time, like, develop those connections in your own, like, find your community, find your people. let your freak flag fly and like nerd out and embrace all the weird, like make connections that are based on genuine passions that you have, regardless of how other people feel about them.
Yeah, I think I'd sum it up as like have a clear strategy, like learn about dating and relationships and friendships and find resources that work for you, coaches, therapists, both that help with you in general, but can help guide you on the journey. Like any experiments, trial and error. So be willing to do a lot of trial and error. It's a numbers game in the end. Most of the people you're try to be friends with won't become your best friends. Most people you date are not going to marry. So like it's like, just kind of be prepared for the numbers game and that trial and error experimentation. And then leaning into I think our two superheroes are our deep feelings. So being prepared to cultivate our feelings and be honest about those and use those as the superpower they are, and same with the honesty. Utilizing your honesty as a strength and looking for people who value both your deep feelings and your honesty, as well as whatever other things make you uniquely you. This is my takeaway.
Yeah, and I also really liked something that you shared when we were preparing for this panel, Joe, which was just to like trust your intuition, and that like when the relationship's right, you kind of feel safe with that person. Not that it's always easy, but you kind of feel at ease. You're not feeling all this doubt or anxiety, and it's like you're not trying to force something. So I guess just people kind of being aware of when there's like this tension, or like, does this thing kind of feel, comfortable, or, how do I feel, in my body when I'm around this person, kind of as a marker, of what relationships, may or may not be a good fit.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we've had any questions from the chat today, but thank you all for all of your insight and for participating in this panel. Were there any other parting thoughts about the topic that you felt like we didn't cover?
Yeah. Get out there and do it.
Right. Yep. You just gotta take that risk sometimes.
Right. Yeah, it's worth it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both again. And that's all for now.